Hi there. This is an update of agrocentric.org, the first of 2011. Happy New Year. Agrocentric is about local autonomy for prosperity. It basically encapsulates all the things that I've been working on in terms of alternative energy, and it's also a good solution to switch to a society that is much more resilient to trouble and is oil independent and all that stuff, and where people have much more to do because there will be more jobs, etc., etc. It has many advantages, and it can be a low carbon economy, and it has basically it's both born out of the fact that peak oil is happening, so oil will run out, it will become too expensive to have our current type of economies, and on the other hand it's also a good idea because you will be low carbon. Why would you be let's say you would wonder, why does your life have to be responsible for tons and tons of carbon dioxide emitted in your atmosphere, which is basically destroying your ecosystem? Why would that have to be? You have to wonder why in my name is at least 23 tons of carbon dioxide emitted every year as a Dutch citizen or as an American. As a Chinese person you are 8 tons, it's still a lot. It should be completely different, and to make it different you have to change the whole structure of the economy and be oriented more locally. It doesn't mean a great upheaval, because of course you have a local governance already. You have a mayor, you have a city, you have all these organizational structures in place, so that's not the big difference. The big difference is that you try to reduce your dependence as much as possible, which won't be liked by many big companies, or the big suppliers, or the banks, or whatever they are. I talked to somebody of a communications company yesterday at the New Year's Eve party, and it was a kind of, I really had to hammer it home that communications technology, and mobile phones in this case, don't have to be dependent on anything. The only thing they need is of course the equipment, which has to be made by some manufacturer, so they can buy it, a communication company can buy that. But it's earning a lot of money, and if it would generate its own electricity and energy for the communication towers, so the transmission towers, if they were all solar panel driven, then they would be completely autonomous. Isn't that true? Like, you provide a service with your transmission towers, it's a mobile phone network, maybe there's some fiber in the ground, so you put the fiber in the ground, and then all the power needed for that. You don't need banks to do that, you don't need energy companies to do that. And you don't need the big industries to do that, because energy, glass fiber, everybody can make it. And of course there's some high-tech products which are patented. Well, that's what you should get rid of, the patent, not the idea that you have to always be super connected as a mega company, because this is of course communication mega company. What has happened, obviously, is that the future revenues of communication companies has been monetized by the banks for fees, as they always do that. And my advice to her was, make yourself energy independent, and then you'll be completely independent, because you'll be earning a shitload of money from all the tax that people send, and you can buy anything you need for your equipment and whatever your structure, your buildings, everything that you want from anybody. Independence. There was a comment on my previous video by Mr. Torrentrox, which was interesting. He said, well, we need oil, and how are you going to mine for metals without it, and how are you going to have your plastics, and just face it, you can't live without oil. And that's completely, completely amazes me, somebody that makes such a comment. It's like, oil will run out, and the world has existed for thousands and thousands of years without oil, which was a very good thing. Oil will run out, so you have to do with something else. And of course, a lot of the demand for mining metals is born out of the economic growth, which is spurred on by the, let's say, previously unlimited amount of oil that was available, which was made available to people due to fiat currency policies, because you print money and you buy oil from Saudi Arabia. It is a symbolic gesture. These countries, they get the fiat currency, but they really didn't want to sell the oil at all. That's because the US is sitting on top of their heads, or has bribed them in all kinds of ways, has corrupted them. So first of all, you have to face the fact that oil will run out. Second of all, you have to realize that the demand for these mined metals is because there is oil. If you take away the oil, the demand will stop because nobody can transport steel from Australia or coal from Australia to wherever it is. Just not going to happen. And then, of course, you can recycle. You can recycle all metals. I would claim that there's plenty of metal, steel, etc. around in the US, driving in big SUVs or wherever, lying about, to do all the things that are really necessary. Of course, if you want to build another million of SUVs, you don't have the metal. And if you want to scrap everything and throw it on a big heap and not recycle it, you don't have enough. But for the basic needs of people, which is food and shelter and heating and all that stuff, you have plenty of metal around, and you don't have to mine anymore. And if it runs out, let's say if you well, of course, metals are rusting, so they're disappearing into nature. Use wood, because that was previously done instead of metal. Grow some trees and use wood, because people use metal because it's easier to work with than wood. Well, with a little bit of difficulty, a little bit more effort, and a little bit less quality constants and all that stuff, you can use trees for doing the same thing. But the general idea in the agrocentric mentality is you recycle everything as much as possible, and if you try to find alternatives. The same goes for plastic, of course. Plastic is used in all kinds of ways for plates and cutlery and packaging, and it's everywhere, really. And so you can do two things. You can say, well, of course we can't live without plastic. Well, there's several answers to that. First of all, you can recycle plastic. It's not done yet. Sadly, there's an invention that has been, of course, picked up by the banks and the oil companies, supported, which is that you use microwave waves to break apart plastic structures, because plastic is basically big hydrocarbon structures that are mixed together with how do you call it? Certain types of bonds. I don't have the words ready, but it's just a chemical reaction. But you use as a base material, you use oil, of course. And that's why there's so much plastic around, because there's so much oil in the ground, or was. But you can break that bond up, and then you end up with a lot of different compounds. A lot of it is reusable oil that you can once more, let's say, mix up with chemicals or heat up and do stuff with and make new plastic. The wrong interpretation of that possibility is that you burn it, because you generate oil, which is the easiest thing to do in the world. Burn things, sadly. And so, you will almost, there wouldn't be the ability to communicate across the globe like I'm doing now with YouTube. The concept of not having ever invented fire by humans, I think it's inevitable that it ever happened. We're burning everything, and that's destroying our planet. But that's an aside. There's another thing you can say about plastic, and that is that you don't really need to use it. Because if I look around my room, I have a chair which has plastic leather, but you can also use real leather. And I get a guitar with a plastic, let's say, board behind the strings, but that can also be mica, or it can be some other material. There's plenty of materials, carton, paper. You have all these resins, so you can do resin impregnated paper. I have plastic in my refrigerator which is packaging all the meat that I buy. And why not glass? Why not buy, take a little bit like a flat glass thing where you go to the butcher and they give you the meat and that stuff, and then you clean it afterwards. That's wow. And maybe you bring it to the supermarket, and they have this hydrogen peroxide or ozone type cleaning, which is very hygienic and is not very polluting. And it absolutely kills everything, or you line it with silver, which kills all the bacteria. There's many different solutions that you don't need plastics for. And then there's another one, and that is that if you make biological vegetable oils, so algae oil, and the US Navy expects to produce 330 million gallons of algae-based oil by 2020. So that's quite a lot. That's all oil you can all change into plastics if you want to. So there's no need for fossil oil, so plastic can be replaced, and of course you don't need to use fossil fuel oil for plastic. And that would actually be a good thing, because you would be capturing carbon dioxide with the algae and turning it into plastic. Of course, sadly, the plastic ends up in our oceans and gets let's say grounded up to such a small let's say size that we will breathe it in eventually, and it will be toxic to our bodies, and that's inevitable. It's what's killing all kinds of animals, and I believe there's no beach in the world that you cannot pick up a hand of sand and there's at least a portion of it is plastic. Very sad. So that's my answer to Mr. Torrent Rocks. It's like, you know, you don't have an alternative. It's going to there's going to be a fossil fuel free world, and I'm trying to make it a world that you can still live in. I was watching a video by Mr. Glover, I believe Jonathan Glover or something like that, because it was titled the Psychology of the New World Order, and it seemed interesting to me. It's a talk about an hour. I'll link next to this video. And it starts, and well, I'm just watching it. And this guy, he's a professor, and he talks, but it's really weak talk. But there's some interesting points to it. First of all, his whole premise, because he makes a difference. He says, well, you got two ends of the spectrum. One is that you have the mob rule, so local strong people will rise up in times of some kind of conflict and set things straight locally, and that's a bad thing. And then you have the other way around, that the whole world is basically dominated by one force which tries to be neutral and tries to let's say resolve conflicts everywhere it can, and that he calls the Leviathan. It's kind of a mythical sea snake monster, but it's also, let's say, an all-powerful dominating force that will intervene everywhere where there's conflict. And for the agoracentric mentality or concept, it's interesting to think about that. What he basically is promoting is a new world order in which there is such a power over the world, and he talks about the United Nations, and he brings up the interesting and quite obvious, let's say, insight that all conflict arises from relative feelings of inferiority and superiority. So that you can see that very clearly in the Second World War and other conflicts, and he takes the same examples, and he talks about let's say psychotic people that have been humiliated in their lives, and then will later be aggressive and be over-asserting themselves over others, just to make sure that they recognize that their identity is recognized. But the whole way that his talk is structured is that you begin with a big problem. So it's a problem, like Naomi Wolf or Naomi Klein, one of these two, says, well, you have this shock, and then the solution is provided. So the problem he poses is the world is a dangerous place, there are terrorists everywhere, and we need to have a force that intervenes and prevents conflicts. And then he reasons all the way to the New World Order. And he talks also about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and then he says, well, let those two groups go to look at other conflicts like in Ireland, and then draw conclusions from that and learn from that and go back. It's all extremely naive, his talk, extremely naive. He's just a very dumb person, I think. Like the way that he approaches this Palestinian, he tries to tell the naive people of the world that you should try to get a big police force, and he also mentions that it should be very, very powerful, which is nonsense, and I can explain a little bit. This worldwide police force, and we should want that to avoid all conflict, and we should believe that looking at other conflicts will teach people and will stop their conflicts. And of course, and that these conflicts are born out of some personal grudge, which in some cases is true. I think it's very naive, because it presents the situation completely devoid of the real history of these peoples. It adheres to the meme that terrorism is a danger to us. Well, it isn't, because I just calculated that 10,000 people died in elevator. No, not 10,000. So, a couple of thousand people died in elevator accidents in the world last year, and that's of course much less than died of terrorism attacks. So, let's be honest. I don't count the civil war in Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan and those kind of things. Those are not terrorist actions. Those are civil wars. And it's quite obvious, contrary to what he says, is that a big police force doesn't work, because it's completely failing everywhere. And so, but there is a point, I think, to the Leviathan idea, let's say, a superseding power, even in the agoracentric worldview. And the way I think that works is first of all, you have to realize that people die all the time. And just like in the text of Deuteronomium that I read, that was about the death jubilee, it's called the sabbatical year. In it is just stated in the Bible, there will always be poor people. Accept it. So you have to take care of them. So you have to be socialist, basically. Accept that. That's a fact. There will always be poor people. Do you want them to be humiliated and aggressive, or do you want to take care of them so they feel part of the community? And why are they poor? Well, maybe because somebody else is feeling superior and is not empathizing with them, so is aggressive towards them, or is denying them, or having a cartel, or having a patent, or stuff like that. But just like you say, well, there will be poor people, you have to say, well, there will be conflict, there will be strife, there will be interpersonal strife. And the best way to prevent that is to make people, let's say, give them a culture that allows them to feel equal, and that prevents them from feeling unequal. And then equal is let's say, the word that says you're both not superior and not inferior. And maybe it's much more helpful to simply say, well, some people feel superior, that's wrong. Other people feel inferior, that's also wrong. Or that should be amended. Because once you, my way of looking at it is, once you feel inferior or superior, you start belonging to another tribe, and you get tribal conflict. So the way I would look at this new world order that he talks about, and which is much less has much less overhead and creates much less creates much less opportunity for abuse, as we see now in the international financial system, which is quite obviously some kind of Leviathan in the world, and is completely fucked up. Is that you say, well, you have these agoracentric communities, you have this big, immense patchwork around the world of all these small communities, and you basically make sure that there's a law that is common to all of them, which says that companies can only operate within one agoracentric community and can never span several of them. So you have an overarching rule that is enforced by a force, a power, which is mobile, like helicopters, drones, stuff like that. But it's not big, because why would it have to be big? It only has to fight. It only has to be more powerful of one of these agoracentric communities. The laws are that communities cannot merge. They have to have a certain size, and they cannot grow beyond a certain size, which is anti-cartel law. Blah blah blah, and etc. And they cannot have weapons, which is you can read that in Il Principe or the Prince. It's a standard way if you create a country which was made up out of city-states with protected cities. You ask every city to break down their protection, and that's good, because then they cannot start a war. They cannot hide behind their walls and say, well, okay, we won't cooperate with this. And the whole idea behind agoracentrism is autonomy. So you don't have to have demands on other cities. So you see? So there is no injustice in the sense that, hey, they're taking all our grain, or hey, we're always giving them our steel and we're never getting anything back. Or just like China, like America sitting on its ass, we're working our ass off. When are we going to get something back from them? That's not going to happen. So instead of having to have a huge world army, which is just a way to feed a huge army industry and become very powerful and have all the money in the world and create all kinds of debauchery, all the communities in the world are cooperating and have quite a small army, which can potentially be used against any one of these communities. For instance, if they become aggressive or dominating over others. But at the same time you have to accept, and this is a really long video, you have to accept that aggression can happen. And you should not worry about it. You should just make sure that whoever is the aggressor in the end doesn't succeed in merging these different communities and ruling over them at the same time and creating more power. Because the whole, one of the primary reasons why I think about agoracentrism and I'm developing the concept is because humans cannot handle the huge aggregates of land and of power and of resources. So it's SMS. Anyway, this video is way too long. But my suggestion would be that if you have the UN ruling the world, it doesn't have to have a big power, but it has to enforce the same law that creates these agoracentric communities around the world, and then nobody will ever be big enough to become the troublemaker. Anyway, thanks for listening, thanks a lot, and I hope you listen again.